Hello and welcome to the second instalment in our series overlooking the armour of the ancient Greek hoplite. Last video we took a look at the sabatons, the protection for the feet, and in today's video we're going to move up from that and look at the greaves or the Knemides, the protection for the shins. Now greaves are a very important piece of armour when it comes to the ancient Greeks, as they are really what protects your lower half that is exposed by the shield. And we see an evolution of these greaves changing, though not too much from the archaic earliest style hoplites to the classical and the sort of transitional period. The earliest style greaves that we seem to see, for instance on the chicky vase, seem to be shorter. They don't come up over the knee, they end just before. And these don't seem to have anatomical features. These then seem to morph later on in the 6th century BC into larger greaves that come up to the top of the knee. In the archaic period as well, we very much see many different stylized greaves. We see some with gorgon heads or other embossed designs. And around the mid-6th century BC is when we start to see the anatomical greaves start to pop up. These styles of greaves are really the final evolutionary stage of ancient hoplite greaves, and they exist well into the Hellenistic period as well. So there's a broad overview of the sort of main styles of greaves that we see, going from sort of smaller half greaves of the early archaic period into larger, less anatomically correct greaves in the archaic, changing into the anatomical greaves around the mid-6th century as well. Although there wouldn't have been a dead cut-off date, it would have been quite a gradual evolutionary overlap between these favoured styles of armour. So let's now get a look at these specific greaves. These were made by an excellent armourer by the name of Adamazier in Poland, though he's no longer making armour anymore. And these are a really excellent example of anatomical greaves that we might see in the sort of transitional and classical periods. And these are adorned in the very stylized musculature of the human body. You will see that these greaves come all the way around into a back section. Most greaves are attached with what is called a self-clamping method. So basically there's enough spring in the bronze that this snaps around your leg. However, we do have some archaeological remains of greaves that do have ringlets, likely used for ties. Possibly this is for greaves that have been resized to shape another wearer, perhaps someone looted from the battlefield or passed down from a family member, or someone whose just legs may have changed shape, or maybe just a backup way of attachment. Greaves are famously a very difficult armour to shape correctly because there is a lot of subtle shaping and variation between people's legs that, if it doesn't sit on properly, causes some serious problems. So out of arguably all the other pieces of armour, greaves are some of the ones that you will need the most custom morphed to your body because they are a very peculiar shape. So that is how most of these greaves are worn. There is a simple, basically, self-clamping. You slide your ankle through and it just pops on. And these stay up great. I've done many long marches with greaves in Greece in very hot, sweaty climates. Don't really see any slipping. If you do, nothing serious. You just pull them up. Really quite an easy and quick way to put them on. Can be a little bit uncomfortable. You have to sort of ride through the pain of it squeezing your ankle, but really nothing too bad and very quick to put on. Now, you'll notice that my greaves are rimmed but not lined. We do have evidence of lining and rimming on greaves. Sometimes we see stitching holes drilled across. However, I have found, and this is a common trend that I've talked about, that people tend to over-pad armour. And proper fitting armour in the Hellenic style of warfare really doesn't need that much padding. I have done a dedicated video on padding for Hellenic armours, which I'll link down below, so I don't have to recover that here. I have found that I have never needed the actual greave to be lined on the inside. I have found that I have needed the rims to be lined. Just because otherwise it's quite a sharp edge that's uncomfortable. I've never had issues with this rubbing my leg raw. I've never had issues with it over sweating. However, others find that you might be more comfortable with leather. I've never had any issues myself with these just being bronze. So we likely would have seen many of these lined. However, I have found that all I need for these grooves, which are very well fitting, is just a lined panel. Possibly some of these greaves would have been reinforced in certain areas. There's a few people in our group who have greaves that do rub on them because they're slightly misshapen, and they have just reinforced it with a little bit of padding. But overall, I have found the padding required for these greaves, and we can just look at them archaeologically as well, how small and close-fitting they are to the body, common trend with ancient Greek armours, is that the room for padding is incredibly minimal, if any. So typically not much padding, probably just a lining or a rimming for these styles of armour. These cover from my ankle up to the end of the knee. You will see that they actually curve out at the end. This allows for greater flexibility and knee motion. These can be a little bit of a trouble when you go to kneel down, because that tends to press on the ground and almost want to pull your greave off. But that's a shape that we commonly see. The knee typically comes out just to allow for extra motion. And what this covers is incredibly important when it comes to hoplites, and these are arguably, and I do say arguably, more important than torso protection, which may sound a little bit crazy and a little bit far-fetched, but stay with me here. So the leg armour, when it comes to ancient Greeks, is a very important piece of armour because it is the only really exposed part that comes out past the shield. You have a massive, large aspis shield that protects your entire upper body and lower body, basically down to your knee, which is then where these greaves come in. This basically meets the lip of the aspis down to the foot. This means that your legs are one of the only targets, especially in more open, archaic style warfare, for an opponent to actually have. Your torso is a very rare target to be hit. Obviously, your torso is home to more vital organs and should be a very well protected element and a priority. However, that is incredibly well protected by your shield in general. Your legs aren't necessarily. So an argument could be made that one might prioritise greaves over a torso just because your legs are basically the only vulnerable spot. However, we seem to have art that shows hoplites with cuirasses and no greaves, and hoplites with greaves and no cuirasses. So it seems that there's not really one or the other here. It's up for debate now, and it's up for debate in the period as well. Unlike later Hellenistic warriors, where we sometimes only see one greave, it seems that hoplites are always wearing two. And we don't have any specific evidence that suggests that front rankers all had to have greaves or Knemides and rear rankers didn't. We don't really have any description detailing the actual layouts and foundations of battle lines in that sense. However, it could probably be a decently safe assumption to assume that you will station heavily armoured people in the front of your formation. But we have no such mention or concrete evidence at all suggesting that front rankers had to be adorned in this and rear rankers had to be adorned in that. Now, something else to talk about when it comes to the shaping of armour is, of course, a lot of the strength of armour actually comes from the shaping. And this may make some medieval historians and armour experts be concerned when you hear how thin ancient Greek armour is. Medieval armour is typically a lot thicker. Ancient Greek armour is typically very thin. I mean, we see 0.5 millimeters in some cases. Greaves maybe averaging around 0.8. I believe these are 1 mil. These are a little bit on the thicker side. But ancient Greek armour tends to be very thin. We see reinforced areas, and we'll cover this when we go on to helmets. We see sometimes 10 millimeters on the nose, but otherwise 0.8 millimeters on the back. We have all sorts of decently thin armours. And in a medieval context, it sounds very thin, right? You sometimes have up to 3 millimeters on the front of a cuirass. 1 millimeter or less than 1 millimeter sounds incredibly thin. But that can tell us a lot about the style of warfare in the time as well. Greaves are typically very light and very thin armours, and the shape of them offers a lot of strength. This is, quite an angled shape. It's embossed, which strengthens the metal, but also encourages spear stabs and arrows to deflect off. The actual shaping of the armour does a massive amount in terms of protection, and though these are stylized in an anatomical way, the actual structure of that leg is also defensive in its value. Now, I touched on this in the previous video on Sabatons. Why is it that Greek armour is often anatomical? That is likely just due to a few reasons. The human body had a massive symbolic part of ancient Greek life and artwork, and it was something to be sculpted and to try and uphold the ideal sculpted physique. And heroic nudity is a massive part of artwork. So by making the armour mimic the nude human form, you are basically looking heroic to a Greek eye, and also portraying your body as being expertly sculpted. Now, whether yours was or wasn't is a little bit up for debate. Of course, we have many people that would have been in excellent shape, but we also have many depictions of people who weren't. These guys weren't professionally trained soldiers, they were citizens. So you would have seen, some people on the chubbier side, some people on the skinnier side, some people who were very lean and muscular. You would have seen a large spectrum. And let's take a look at how these were worn. You'll have to excuse my inauthentic genes here, but basically how this works is you just simply slide your foot into the armour. Now, this can be a little bit uncomfortable. You just have to sort of power through it. You just pull it up, and you can see how well this armour morphs to the shape of the leg. You can see that it protects up and just actually slightly above my knee and follows the shapings of my leg very well. And this will stay up very, very well. You can run in these. You can do all sorts without them really slipping. They're really a great design. They are very friendly to put on, very quick to put on. Some people worry that, well, what happens if your leg gets hit and it swells? Well, by the nature of them being springy, they have some flex in them. And that's really all there is to them. They're a very important piece of armour when it comes to the ancient Greeks. To take them off again, this is again a little bit uncomfortable. You just basically have to push it forward and flip it off. And then just to put the spring a little bit, spring it back. There we are. Anyone who's been hit in the shin will know how much that hurts, and these pieces of armour would obviously help that quite a lot. There's really not a lot of muscle or fat over your shins, and this would offer an excellent amount of protection. It would likely deflect and stop most spear strikes and arrows from getting your legs, and overall were a massively important asset to the ancient Greek panoply. We see greaves existing well through the Archaic into the Classical period. They seem to become slightly less common as we get to the later 400 BCs and into the 300 BCs. However, this is likely because you are filling your demographic of men with poorer class citizens. So whereas in the Archaic and early Classical, the Hoplite class is more of an aristocratic class, as numbers and city-states begin to be engaged in mass conflict, you have to forcefully conscript more men. And we see an overall evolution to slightly less armour, likely as well because formations are getting progressively tighter knit and tighter packed from the more open Archaic and early Classical styles of warfare to the tighter Hellenistic styles of warfare. So armour is then dropped in exchange for being able to run into battle, for instance, something that is more common in the Classical than the Archaic. And just because you are physically more covered by bodies and shields, people then decide to not wear armour. It is, you can move a little bit better, you're a lot cooler. However, you are potentially more exposed and more likely to be killed if they manage to bypass that shield. But greaves like this are used well into the armies of Alexander, and even some Roman-style greaves follow a very similar design to these. So there we go, that was a look at sort of a rough evolutionary stage and a little bit of in-depth stuff on the Greaves or Knemides of the ancient Greek Hoplite or Hoplite of around the Archaic to the Classical period. If you haven't checked out installment number 1 on the Sabatons, the foot armour, then I'll leave that in the description below, and stay tuned for upcoming videos where we are taking a look at each individual piece of armour worn by the Archaic and Classical Hoplites. Special thanks to our channel members for supporting the channel. If you yourself would like to support the channel, please consider checking out our Patreon or memberships pages. Those would be an absolute amazing help, and again, special thanks to those people who continue to do that. If you can't afford to do that or don't want to do that, no worries at all. Liking and subscribing and sharing these videos is a massive help. Thanks very much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I'll hopefully catch you in the next one.